This is the conclusion to a discussion of the Secret Doctrine of the Rosicrucians, written by William Walker Atkinson in 1918 under the pseudonym Magus Incognito. And it is a continuation of a discussion of the 7 aphorisms of creation, starting with the 3rd aphorism of creation. The previous 2 were covered in a previous video. The 3rd aphorism of creation, according to the Secret Doctrine of the Rosicrucians, is the 1 became 2. The neuter became bisexual. Male and female, the 2 in 1, evolved from the neuter, and the work of generation began. Here we see the symbol of the phallic cross. In order to understand the symbology of the universal androgyny, it is necessary to first become familiar with the 2 ancient symbols of sex. In all the ancient philosophies and religions, we find that the cross is the symbol of the male and the circle the symbol of the female. In representing the bisexual, the hermaphrodite, the androgyny, the 2 symbols, i.e. the cross and the circle, are combined in one of several ways. The original way was that of placing the cross within the circumference of the circle, but later usage preferred the various forms of the phallic cross, which consist of the circle or oval sustaining the cross, which depends downward from it. Sometimes the cross is represented as the letter T and the circle as the letter O. This is the well-known esoteric symbol, the swastika. It consists of a modified cross that looks like a whirling wheel. The whirling cross of the swastika, when seen in rapid motion, presents the appearance of the circle enclosing a cross. This symbol is particularly sacred to the Rosicrucians because to them it represents the universal activity and universal creation, which symbolizes the great mystery of occult generation on all planes of life. The ancient Rosicrucian brotherhoods transformed the circle into the rose, and the cross sometimes transformed into the sword with its cross, life, handle. Therefore, the sign of the cross or sword combined with the circle or rose symbolized the mystic union of the rose and the cross. This is where the name Rosicrucian comes from. It means rose cross. Atkinson reveals that according to the Secret Doctrine of the Rosicrucians, there are present in all creation the activities of a male principle and a female principle. Both are universal in nature, character, and extent, and both are opposing aspects of the world soul. Each acts and reacts upon the other, and this produces all creative activity and the cosmic becoming or universal activity and change. Also, these 2 sex principles operate and manifest upon every plane of life, from the submineral to the mineral, to the plant, animal, human, and then to the superhuman, and finally to the angelic or godlike. And likewise, in everything in creation, there is present and manifest the activity of sex. The Rosicrucian doctrine also states that the positive pole of magnetism and electricity was the masculine force, while the negative force, negative pole, was female. The negative pole of the battery is the pole of generation or the production of new forms and energies. On each and every plane of life, physical, mental, spiritual, is found the universal principle of sex, in some of its phases and forms. Atkinson tells us that sex cannot be escaped in nature, that the universe is bisexual and all creation on every plane is caused by sex and sex only. Had the world soul remained neuter, there would have been no universal manifestation or creation. It was necessary that the principle of sex should appear in order that creation should begin. It is only by the constant and continuous action and reaction of the 2 sex principles in nature that creation, process, becoming, and change is possible. And as all things are but the products of change, process, becoming, and creation, it follows that without sex there would have been no things in the universe. The world soul would have been apart, alone, and single until the end of its days. The 1 becomes the 2, and from the 2 proceed the many. The fourth aphorism in the Secret Doctrine of the Rosicrucians is, the one becomes many. The unity becomes diversity. The identical becomes variety. Yet the many remains one. The diversity remains unity, and the variety remains identical. In this aphorism, we see the concept of the world soul, the first manifestation of the eternal parent, as a one manifesting as many, a unity manifesting as diversity, an identical manifesting as variety, yet remaining ever one, unity, and identical. This is represented by the Rosicrucians by the symbol of a small circle within a larger circle, the smaller circle being filled with tiny points or centers of manifestation. The outer circle is the infinite unmanifest. The smaller circle is the world soul, and the small dots or points are the individualized centers of life, being, and activity manifested by the world soul. The idea that all beings are expressions of the one being, centers of consciousness, form, and activity within itself, is a fundamental part of all occult and esoteric teaching. That all being is one, life one, all form one, all consciousness one, is known to all true disciples of the occult and esoteric teachings. We may term this concept essential oneness. Atkinson points out, however, that the one life is not to be thought of as dividing and splitting itself up into bits, parts, and particles in order to accomplish the process of creation and the manifestation of the world, but is to be thought of as merely reflecting itself in the many individual mirrors of expression. How did the one become the many, and yet remain the one, unity, identity of the world soul, unaffected and unchanged by its plunge into manifestation? Atkinson tells us it is by the process of evolution, but he says that modern science neglects to accept the fact that a twin activity of manifestation also exists, and it is called involution. The ancient occultist, however, knew this concept well. We know a thing can be unwrapped, unfolded, unrolled, etc., but we forget that before this can take place, the thing must have first been wrapped up, folded up, or rolled up. The esoteric teachings state that before the process of evolution from simple to more complex forms of manifestation could take place, from lower to higher, there must first have been an involution or infolding of the world soul into the simple, gross, elemental forms of matter. The vibrations were first lowered before they were increased. Then, once the process of evolution began, it proceeded rapidly. Atkinson says it is caused by the constant striving of the life and mind within the sheaths of matter to express more and still more of themselves, and to mold and use the sheaths of matter in the work of self-expression. But we must always remember that in all the millions of types of living forms and the millions upon millions of individuals ensouling these forms, there is no separateness. All life is one, and all life is but the life of the world soul. In the fifth aphorism of creation, the Rosicrucian is directed to reflect upon the concept of the universal life, the life of the world soul, which permeates everything everywhere within its sphere of existence. The concept of the world soul is represented by the Rosicrucians as the universal flame of life, which we see depicted on this slide. The fifth aphorism states, "The one is the flame of life. The many are the sparks in the flame. The flame, once lighted, kindles everything within its sphere. The fire is in everything and everywhere. There is nothing dark or cold within its sphere." The symbol of life, the flaming fire, is the eternal, universal fire or flame, abiding in the entire universe in all of its parts. It remains unchanged and undiminished in its essence. This is why the flame of fire has always been the symbol for spirit. Atkinson tells us that the flame, while ever remaining the same, is never composed of the same particles or sparks for even 2 consecutive seconds. In its essence, it ever remains the same and unchanged, yet its manifestation is always accompanied and correlated to the appearance and disappearance of innumerable tiny particles of material substance, which it kindles into sparks, then destroys by the process of combustion, to be replaced by others of similar nature. And so it is with universal life. It was formerly the teachings of science that the universe was composed of two great classes of things, living things and lifeless things. Living things were classified as all human and animal life as well as plant life. It was thought that minerals, chemical elements, and the like were utterly lifeless. It was the esoteric schools of thought and occultists that sought to reverse this thinking. They taught that there is nothing lifeless in the universe. Everything is imbued with life in some form, degree, or phase. Remembering that Atkinson is writing this in 1918, we note he says that the old idea of a half-lifeless universe is fast passing away, and men of advanced science now acknowledge that the universe is alive and as a whole and in all of its parts. Atkinson sums up his thoughts on the fifth aphorism of creation. The fire is in everything and everywhere. There is nothing dark or cold within its sphere, by noting the occult axiom that all power is willpower, and says that the movements of electrons, atoms, molecules, and masses of matter are in response to an inward feeling resulting from the attraction to or repulsion to or from other forms of matter, and the will action in response thereto. The contention of the materialist that life and mind are only qualities of matter and are to be found in all forms of material objects needs to be inverted in order to show the truth that matter is nothing but the outer garment of soul, life-mind, and all material forms are ensouled by life and mind. Here we see the symbol of the seven planes of consciousness. In the Secret Doctrine of the Rosicrucians, the sixth aphorism of creation states the following: "As life is the essence of spirit, so is consciousness the essence of life. Spirit is one, yet it manifests in many forms of life. Life is one, yet it manifests in many forms of consciousness. While the forms of manifested consciousness are innumerable, yet the wise know consciousness to manifest on seven planes, and these planes of consciousness are known to the wise as 1. The plane of the elements, 2. The plane of the minerals, 3. The plane of the planets, 4. The plane of the animals, 5. The plane of the human, 6. The plane of the demigods, 7. The plane of the gods." Atkinson defines consciousness as follows: "In its essence, it manifests as the attribute of receiving impressions from outside stimuli and the power to respond thereto." He spends a good deal of time describing the 4 lower levels of consciousness, but saves discussion of the 3 higher planes of consciousness for a separate chapter. This is the symbol of the 3 higher planes of consciousness. These are the phases of consciousness that are above the plane of animal consciousness. These planes of consciousness have a special symbol, which is the 3 linked circles you see here. Each of the circles are linked with the other 2 on either side of it, the circumference of each circle extending over that of the 2 others on either side of it, which indicates that each plane of consciousness is blended with the others. The plane of human consciousness is that plane of conscious activity which is manifested by human beings, high and low, in varying degrees. It is divided into 7 subplanes, and each of those into 7, and so on. At one pole, this plane is linked with and blends into the highest subplanes of the plane of animal consciousness, while at its other pole, it blends into the lower subplanes of the next highest plane, the plane of consciousness of the demigods. The individual who manifests on the plane of human consciousness is in a measure in touch with the 2 higher planes, known respectively as the plane of the consciousness of the demigods and the plane of consciousness of the gods. The reason that the Rosicrucians place these 3 higher planes of consciousness in a trinity of circles apart from the lower 4 planes is that on these 3 higher planes of consciousness, the individual soul manifests self-consciousness, or the consciousness of I am, in at least a certain degree. While on the lower 4 planes, this consciousness of I is entirely absent, and the mental activity is more or less automatic and instinctive. On the very lowest forms of human consciousness, man's mental and emotional activity is but little more than that of the higher animals. In some cases, animals actually seem to display a greater degree of intellectual power, though on instinctive lines. But even in the lowest forms of human life, there appears at least a small degree of self-consciousness, or the conviction that I am, that form of consciousness by which the human individual becomes aware of himself as an individual entity. This, rather than the degree of intellectual development, is the characteristic distinguishing mark of the human being. Atkinson explains, while even in the case of the highest animal, the consciousness is always directed outward, in even the lowest type of man, there is at least a faint degree of the inward direction of consciousness. The animal always thinks of outside things, while even the primitive man occasionally thinks of himself, makes himself the object of his own thoughts, in at least the sense of considering his own feelings, ideas, and comparing them with others previously had by him. There is no inside world or something within to the animal, while man to some degree is always aware of the inside world or something within as distinguished by something without. According to Atkinson, the development of the higher forms of self-consciousness may be noted in the gradual unfoldment of the mind of the young child. At a certain stage of the mental evolution of the child, there comes a particular period at which the child awakens to the realization that it is an individual, or develops a sense of I. One writer says of this state of newly awakened consciousness, although this feeling of separateness grows less acute as the man grows older, it is always present to a greater or less degree until a still higher stage is reached, when it disappears. This self-conscious stage is painful to many. Many find themselves entangled in a mass of mental states, which one thinks is himself, or inextricably bound up with himself, and the struggle between the awakening ego and its confining sheaths is very painful in some cases, and this becomes more painful as the individual advances in self-consciousness and nears the end at which he is to find deliverance. Man eats of the tree of knowledge and begins to suffer, and is driven out of the Garden of Eden of the child consciousness in which the individual has lived like the birds, not concerning himself with the affairs of his higher nature. Man pays dearly for the gift of self-consciousness, yet it is worth it all, for he finally reaches heights of higher consciousness and is delivered from his burden. The old Rosicrucian masters said, when the I knows itself to be the self and master, then only is it able to take its throne and enforce its will upon its subject in the world of its thoughts, desires, feelings, and emotions. The next plane of consciousness that is above the plane of human consciousness is called by the Rosicrucians the plane of consciousness of the demigods. This is because the individual who attains these heights and is able to be conscious on this plane is so much higher than mere man that he seems to be almost as the gods. The Rosicrucians teach that on this high plane of being dwell certain very advanced souls, once men, but now almost as gods when compared to men, and these aid in the great work of the advancement of the race of men in the general course of spiritual evolution. The teaching is that the human race as a whole is slowly evolving on the higher planes of consciousness, and long ages from now will conscious normally on it. In the meantime, however, certain advanced souls have transcended the higher plane, the human plane, and have passed on to the higher plane, where they aid and assist the rest of the human race. From time to time, the individual who is working on conscious evolution may receive flashes of consciousness from this higher plane, which for the time being bring that individual into contact with that plane. This explains the experiences of the mystics. Atkinson calls them flashes of cosmic consciousness. To those who have experienced these flashes of illumination, or glimpses of the fire of cosmic consciousness from the plane of consciousness of the demigods, there comes a realization of the actual oneness of life in the universe, and an actual awareness that the universe is animated by one life, which is diffused among and permeates every portion of its extent and manifestation. Atkinson says that many of the white magicians of the human race belong to the higher planes of this great plane of consciousness. Also, some who are known as black magicians have managed to break into the kingdom of heaven on these planes and have prostituted their power. However, he tells us that these are inevitably punished by nature herself and are either forced into the legions of light or else are disintegrated and destroyed by the very forces of nature which they have set into operation for selfish purposes. The final of the three higher planes of consciousness is the plane of the consciousness of the gods. On this level dwell beings so high in the scale of knowledge, power, and bliss that even the imagination of the most advanced student or teacher can barely grasp the idea. These beings are so far advanced that they are practically akin to the conception of the gods created by man to account for the universe and to serve as objects of worship. Atkinson tells us that on this plane are personal gods, many of them, but none of them alone may be regarded as God in the sense of the eternal parent or infinite reality, because even the highest of them have their limitations and restrictions, and all are but manifestations of the infinite unmanifest. Each of these exalted beings has had its beginning or birth in manifestation, and each will finally have its ending and disappearance into the infinite unmanifest, where all sense of separateness and personality will disappear. The characteristic element of this highest form of all consciousness is the conscious realization that of the individual that he is identical with the infinite and is only apparently separated therefrom by the most tenuous and subtle veil of illusion. Glimpses and flashes of this consciousness in rare instances filter down into the consciousness of individuals on this earth and have done so in the past. Apparently, many of the illumined ones living in our own time have pierced the veil of this particular plane and been almost blinded by the light that has flashed upon them. In the Secret Doctrine of the Rosicrucians, we find the seventh aphorism of creation. The soul of man is sevenfold, yet but one in essence. Man's spiritual unfoldment has at its end the discovery of himself beneath the sevenfold veil. On this slide, we see the symbol of the sevenfold soul, the figure of a man surrounded by seven outlined shapes. The man himself in his essence is represented by the blank space disclosed by the inmost outline, and each one of the concealing but revealing veils is represented by an outlined figure, each being but one of the series of seven. The series of outlines is enclosed in the circle representing the infinite unmanifest. Atkinson reveals that the symbol is interpreted as follows. 1. The infinite unmanifest manifests itself in the elemental soul. 2. The elemental soul takes upon itself the outward form of mineral substance. 3. The mineral soul evolves from itself, the plant soul. 4. The plant soul evolves from itself, the animal soul. 5. The animal soul evolves from itself, the human soul. 6. The human soul unfolds into the soul of the demigods. 7. The soul of the demigods unfolds into the soul of the gods. And finally, the soul of the gods once more is resolved into pure spirit, which is represented by the blank space at the center of the symbol. Though there is only one real soul, the Rosicrucians taught that seven veils conceal from yet reveal to man his real self. The veils that conceal yet reveal spirit are the elemental soul, the mineral soul, the plant soul, the animal soul, the human soul, the soul of the demigods, and the soul of the gods. Atkinson summarizes by saying that the lesson is that in every man there lies concealed the potentiality of godhood, and stages less than godhood, though above that of ordinary manhood, and that in every man also abide the lower phases of manifested existence, even the very lowest of all. The wise man uses the lower, but does not allow the lower to use him, but instead maintains a positive, masterful mental attitude toward the lower planes of being, while opening himself receptively to the influences of the higher planes of his self.